All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about the CloudZero platform, a little bit of an eye to the future and what we're thinking about in terms of New Year's resolutions. And ultimately, I want to give everyone a good overview of what they can do with the CloudZero platform to help supercharge your FinOps maturity. I will be your speaker today. I'm Erik Peterson. I'm the CTO and founder of CloudZero. It's an absolute pleasure to meet all of you. I hope that we're going to continue the conversation on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, wherever you should want to find us. I'm more than happy to chat with you about any of the topics here. My team is constantly looking at the experiences that we see in this industry, particularly in the FinOps Foundation, and you can find me over there in their Slack group as well. So I look forward to talking with all of you in the future after this conversation. Just as a little housekeeping, we are going to be sharing the recording after the webinar. So I want to make sure everybody is aware of that. We'll send that out to everyone, make sure that you have access to it. As I'm talking, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. This will be so much more fun for all of us if we can make this a conversation. And I look forward to answering those questions as we go along. I'll have my eye on it here on the left-hand side. And for any general questions or assistance, feel free to use the chat feature as well. After this, we'll want to know how we did. So don't forget to let us know as well how we did. We welcome all feedback. So let's jump in. So I wanted to start somewhere very straightforward. I think everyone probably understands this intrinsically, but it is a concept that we should all understand the power of the software engineering and development teams on in our organization. Because essentially every engineering decision they're making is a buying decision. We moved into a world, whether we do it or not, that the decision to use a certain architecture pattern, write a different line of code, make an API call, has potentially expensive and long-lasting effects on the overall cloud costs that your organization is going to experience. And if you're looking to build game-changing, profitable products, making sure that your gross margins are effective and ultimately reduce your costs and keep your cloud costs aligned with your business objectives, it is super important that we understand that every engineering decision is a buying decision. And of course, the big question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we make better buying decisions? And that's one of the things that I want to cover today when I get into CloudZero's platform and some of the concepts that we focus on. So the first New Year's resolution that I want everyone to think about as they move into the next year is to think about getting organized. Now, in a very Marie Kondo sense, it's important. If it's important to you, keep it. If it's not, let it go. We have a lot of tags. We have a lot of other types of organization or environment. And if you're like most folks and most of the customers and prospects that I speak with, we are all in some way struggling to get our cloud environments organized. And this is at the root, ultimately, of understanding the costs of those buying decisions. Now, some of the things that you might be concerned about or worrying about are, how do you get your tagging in line? How do you handle Kubernetes spend, particularly that big black box of Kubernetes spend that hides all of the inner workings from the cost and usage report? How do you report on those costs and handle shared costs? And ultimately, how do you handle things beyond just the major cloud providers like AWS, GCP, and Azure, but everything that's contributing to your COGS? And so New Year's resolution 1 is get organized. You may have been trying to achieve this for many years, but CloudZero has built some very unique technology around the specific point that I want to share with you. The first is, how can we break this tagging barrier? Most folks are struggling to get changes done in the organization, and that becomes the kind of root challenge for organizing spend. One of the things that CloudZero set out to do was to break this barrier. Why should organizing our spend and putting it in context with the business, delivering the reports and giving the insights that we need, be entirely dependent upon how often I can make tagging changes in my environment? We know all too often that this is complicated, that different business units follow different standards. And in most cases, the industry best case is 60% cost allocation, which means that your organization is only 60% effective when it comes to understanding your costs. CloudZero has built a unique technology that's unique in the industry called cost formation. And I'm going to show you that in the demo. It allows you to fix tags, build organization independent of them, and change them as often and as quickly as you want. In seconds, you can recalculate how your cost is being presented in all of your reports and systems, including our anomaly detection. Through cost formation and additional data that CloudZero's platform can pull in, we can also allocate those shared costs. Shared costs are one of the #1 concerns for organizations using Kubernetes, large databases, or other large auto-scaling or component systems. Often these appear as just one large expense, and it's challenged to understand how that breaks out according to features, products, or services, or even customers. So CloudZero's platform has been designed to go beyond just looking at the cost and usage data, but pull in additional information that tells us about how these assets are actually being used in our environment. So for example, imagine breaking apart that database cost by the seconds of query time per feature or per query. That's one of the things that CloudZero's platform can do in real time, and actually break that down by the hour so that you can understand that your shared database costs, even though that might be in total $1,000, how does it break out by the actual consumers, features, or even customers that are using that system? And this is just one of the powers of bringing telemetry and cost and usage data together and using cost formation to define exactly how those components interlink. There's a second New Year's resolution that I want to leave everyone with, which is to improve your unit economics. Ultimately, you want to be able to understand how much it costs to deliver value in your environment so that you can get at very important questions like gross margins, and ultimately, what is your profit margin? By improving and focusing on your unit economics, you can also align finance, business, product, and engineering. Everyone understands that if you're in the business to deliver a specific unit, if it costs more to deliver that than you're making, you have a problem, and you can align the entire team on meaningful, actionable cost cutting and savings activities. Unit economics is at the center of this. And a lot of all of the activities that we're doing bring in cost from lots of different systems. So it's not enough to just look at your individual cloud spend, but also bring in other things like Snowflake spend or Databricks or MongoDB. All of these things are tied in with the infrastructure that we build. If you're using other modes to organize that spend across those systems, we also can pull that metadata into cost formation and use that to express a overall organization. So for example, let's say I have warehouses or labels I have warehouses in Snowflake, or I have labels in Kubernetes. I have tags in AWS. I can combine all these things together. And this is true for all the cloud systems that we support. When we bring all this information together, telemetry plus cost formation plus the cost and usage data together, that allows us to do some very interesting things, like calculate the cost per customer and then identify what assets and resources those customers are using and how much they're contributing to your overall costs. It's a very powerful and motivating force when you can identify who your most expensive tenants or customers are, or consumers of your assets, and then guide your engineering teams to go address those specific cost concerns. And I'm going to show all of this to you in the demo. Cost formation is a very simple language as well to use. It's fully fledged. It gives you the ability to, on the fly, alter how things are aligned. And it's not just limited to tags. It can include account information, metadata, line item information associated with the individual line items of cost data, Kubernetes labels, some of those details that I mentioned earlier. And telemetry in the middle here is very simple data that specifically tells us consumption against that resource. When we line these things up, it becomes something that's very easy to configure and maintain. It doesn't necessarily require code changes in your environment to implement. To produce this data, typically you use a BI tool or existing analytics systems that you have. Maybe it's Segment or Amplitude, or maybe it's your own BI solution. And this can be managed by ops and not dev. And like I mentioned earlier, good tags, bad tags, it doesn't matter. Instead of waiting on engineering cycles to make tagging changes, you, the user of CloudZero, can make changes as often as you like to organize your spend exactly the way that you want to see it. And then the third New Year's resolution that I want to share with you before I jump into the demo is focusing on engineering profit. Let's turn those engineers into profit engineers and give them the tools necessary to understand the costs associated with their actions. If they have the context from the business as well as their operations, they can very quickly see what's actually driving the changes of cost in their environment. And that's just another data source that CloudZero can overlay on that cost information. Being able to see when a deployment occurred, an anomaly occurred, and other cost or marketing activities happening in the environment, like onboarding a new customer, becomes a very powerful tool to triage and troubleshoot issues. When engineers can react quickly and get the right data at the right time, you can save a significant amount of money. The best way to save money is typically not to spend it in the first place. And so empowering engineers saves money. You give them that rich context to understand what's driving their costs, and they ultimately will build more effective, more efficient, and more cost-effective systems. So I'd love to dive in and talk a little bit about how we help manage cost, optimize dev, and maximize profit using the CloudZero platform. So I'm going to do that right now. And while I'm doing that, I noticed a few questions in the Q&A. I'll answer one quickly, specifically about Databricks. Right? There are capabilities on our platform using our any cost adapters to pull in cost data as it relates to Databricks, and also use some of the organization techniques that are unique to Databricks and pull those in as information that CloudZero can use as well. That's, again, pointing to the power of cost formation. I can take these different environments and systems and merge them together under one common virtualized organization of my environment. So great question. Please keep them coming. So what you're looking at here is CloudZero's Explorer. And the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that this exploration of cost is focused on things as it relates to your business. Now, it's very easy for me to show you this, your spend in relationship to your infrastructure, but that's the view that we've been looking at for the last decade. And we know it really hasn't got us to where we want to go, and it's not solving our cost challenges today. It's more valuable to look at the information as it relates to the products or services or value that your business delivers. And that's what we're looking at here at a top level. We're looking at a fictional organization called Pied Piper, and we see that they've got three very specific units: their internal technology operations, their Pied Piper platform, and the very expensive data engineering team. We always kind of wonder what those folks are doing, and we can explore a little of that in our platform. Now, this organization is driven by cost formation as well as the hierarchy of this, and I'll show you a little bit about how we can figure that in a bit. But I can drill into this information. I can start to see, well, what makes up this fictional company, Pied Piper? Well, we've got two products here, Chat and Exchange. And I can keep drilling down until I start to get at some of the lower level details of this environment. Now, that's an interesting view. Right here, I'm starting to look at it from a service perspective. I can see I'm combining Snowflake and AWS spend. But I also have a lot of different dimensions that have been generated by cost formation that I can pick from. If I have Kubernetes spend, I can break it apart by Kubernetes. If I have customers, I can break it by customers. And I can build these out to represent particularly any structure that I want. I also have the typical cloud provider dimensions, resources, service, usage family, all the tags that are available to us, and even labels as they relate to Kubernetes. Now, all that information, when it combines together here, gives me a good view about what's going on. Now, the first thing I want to look at here as I think about my service usage is what is my most expensive use of services. And looking at this pretty quickly, I see I've got a pretty diverse set of services, but I've got a lot of spend as it relates to Snowflake. Now, that spend seems to be pretty stable month over month. I'm looking at the last 30 days of information here, because the change over that last 30 days has only been about 1%. This is another thing that CloudZero puts front and center. What is changing, and what is that change costing me? Now, in this case, I want to really kind of dive in and understand why this total cost for Snowflake compute is a little bit higher than usual. And when I drill into that, I'm going to get a view that's a little bit more specific to the warehouses that I'm using. In this case, I'm looking at the specific data warehouses that are in Snowflake, and I'm pulling that in, and I can see that I've got one here that's growing in particular. Now, looking at my spend across all of my customers this way doesn't really help me understand who or what is using that warehouse. And this is where a lot of cost exploration gets stuck and stops. But I can go up here and I can select customers from my dimensions view, and I can start to get a better sense of who's actually accounting for my costs. The first piece here I see is that across my customers, and I've got about 10 of them here, that massive dynamic is resulting in the massive spend for my Snowflake costs. That spend can be drilled in, and we can see exactly what products and services they're using. And I can go back and pick resources from here and now see exactly what resources are related to that. So this particular customer is using these particular warehouses, and I can see exactly which one they're making the most use of, this prod live application and application high. I can go back to that telemetry I talked about earlier, and I can even start to break that apart by query. Now, these are query IDs, and I can drill down into that later. This depends on the telemetry you've sent in, but this allows me to explore this information in ways that are quite unique to how CloudZero's system works. So I'm going to jump back up here for a second, up to the business, or to the resource view, and just take a quick look at this again. Now, this is on a daily basis here. If I switch to, let's say, the last 7 days, I can also get to an hourly basis. And this starts to explore the data at an even lower level that helps me understand some of the behaviors of my customers as they work in this information. Way go. And I can start to understand exactly the time of day also that some of these things are calculating, and that can give me even more information. Now, there's an important question to ask here. I'm exploring the data and I'm learning things about my environment in a way that might not be super easy for me. But how do we work in an environment that's constantly changing where I might not necessarily have the time to look at this information? Well, one of the ways CloudZero solves that is through some very powerful anomaly detection that is automatically configured to those dimensions and group bys that we have configured in the system. Those anomalies are sent via email or Slack directly to the engineering teams that you can define in the platform. So for example, here, I'm looking at an anomaly that was sent and transmitted to a specific engineering team about a very specific part of my system. And I picked this example specifically because we've got a couple of things going on here that are highlighted by our events feature. The first one here is a GitHub change. We see some code getting deployed and changing the costs associated with it. That deployment occurred. We see the costs starting to rise. That's probably related to some very specific code changes. If I wanted to click on this, it could take me directly to the code and actually review that. If I was an engineer, that could be super helpful. In this case, we're looking at a few Lambda functions here, and the cost for that Lambda function increased because we increased also the memory consumption of that function. But something interesting here happens a few hours later. We see an anomaly. Now, these anomalies are designed to be presented to you when they're in the low dollar figures. The idea here is to help you save money by not spending it in the first place. Our system is looking over 3 months of data, accounting for seasonality, specific aspects and dimensions of the information, and configured specifically to highlight things that are truly unique and worthy of attention. So this anomaly tells me that something else might have occurred in that code. As an engineer, I can go back and look at that code, and in this case, we found a bug. Now, the best part about this is a few hours later, we see that bug getting fixed. We see another deployment, and we see the cost dropping back down into an ordinary pattern that we were looking for. This type of activity happens thousands of times a month across all of CloudZero's customers, where we provide that very rapid insight for engineering teams to understand when they deploy new code, when they make a change in the environment, what was the cost of that action, and how can they make better buying decisions as a result of that. So that's just one way that we get the data quickly to the engineers. And these links are very easy to share and post in Slack or whatever system you're using to exchange information. Now, I keep on referencing this CloudZero cost formation and how you can use that to organize your spend. Example here, I'm looking at something that's very specific to some AWS resources. But let's go back to my main view here in Explorer. And remember that I was looking at this according to products. How did we get there? So we use cost formation to define, in a way that allows us to edit this at any time, the information that will drive that view. And not only that, it drives the hierarchy for that view so that when I'm using the UI, it behaves exactly the way I want it to behave. So what you're seeing on the screen here is some very straightforward allocations of that cost. And I'm using tags, service names, account IDs, any metadata that's available to me in the environment. This goes beyond just what can be tagged. In fact, CloudZero can organize spend that is untaggable as well. Now, this cost formation can describe a very complicated environment or really account for any type of allocation in your environment. We can also define in that cost formation proportional allocations, shared costs being allocated by telemetry, like I mentioned, fixed allocations, or proportional allocations based on other spend. And what CloudZero is doing behind the scenes is something also very unique and very powerful. We're building a graph, a true understanding of how your spend flows from products, features, services, or whatever units you choose to define your environment. These could be teams, business units, or other components that ultimately define the rules of how costs should be allocated. There's a couple of very powerful ways you can apply this. It can be applied to chargeback and showback. It can be applied to breaking that very large database cluster apart and sharing that cost across the various teams that are using that system. You can also break that spend up by customers or transactions or other components. So this view allows me to visualize exactly the graph that we're building based on those dimensions. And I can ultimately visualize exactly how those dimensions are feeding the cost allocation as well to get a good sense of how cost is flowing in my environment. This is pretty significant when it comes to truly understanding how costs are allocated. And remember, we want to get you to 100% of all of this spend. So I've got a good question here in the Q&A. I'm going to answer it real quickly. It's a question about what is the process for bringing accounts into the system, how easy or complex that is. So I can cover that really quickly for you. It's a great question. So on our connections screen, we've got the ability to connect individual accounts, and we break them into two essentially different categories. These can be billing connections, where we're getting cost and usage data, or what we call resource connections. And these are defined by the cloud providers that we're connecting to. Resource connections give us information about the assets, the resources that are in there, and bring data into the platform that might not be available in the cost and usage data set. Billing connections bring in connections to those services where we want to pull in cost data. So in this case, in my example here, I've got Databricks, Azure, Snowflake, AWS, and GCP spend. I can actually monitor some of these things. I can see that I've got a little bit of a connection problem, and I've got all the details here to troubleshoot that if I need to. We know that cloud environments are very dynamic, and so we provide a lot of information to do so. When it comes time to add a new connection, I only need to go find the connection that I want to add, and I specify the configuration in the screen. And most of our connections are defined using automation specific to the cloud providers or cloud services that we're using. So for example, in the case of AWS, I can choose a very automated path where I use a CloudFormation template or Terraform template to connect automatically to that environment. Once those account connections are set up, we maintain that information within our system, and all that data then gets visualized here, where I can break it out by cloud provider, for example. So here I'm looking at all of the spend in this demo account here by cloud provider within just the last 7 days. So great question. Thank you very much. So jumping back over here, I want to talk a little bit about the configuration as well for telemetry. Telemetry is what we use to break apart shared costs or answer that cost per customer question. And that telemetry essentially is activity, a definition of consumption against a particular part of my system. So if I look at some of the sample data that's come into the system recently, I can take a look at those types of events that are driving this environment. Actually, there's a better way to look at this right here, back on the slide, where I can see here and just walk you through the example briefly. So, for example, I have a element name defined here, which is my customer. I have the cost per tenant, which is what I've named this stream of data, and I have a value defining the consumption, and it is going against my production environment. This small piece of data, which is automatically aggregated by our platform, and we have tools that can automate the translation of existing data in your environment from things like Sumo or other log management systems, BI tools, or SQL-based systems to bring all this information in. Essentially, if you can visualize this data in a spreadsheet, you can automate and bring this into CloudZero. That telemetry then defines how we're going to break up that spend within our platform. So that's how I get at driving that cost per customer. When I was visualizing here and picking spend out specifically by customer, that's data that's being driven into our API that then can be used to allocate that spend. Now, I was looking at that one particular customer massive dynamic earlier. Let's drill down into another customer and take a little bit of an investigation. I can see here this customer is actually using a different set of features, different from what Massive Dynamic was using. In fact, they're using our Piper billing feature, and I might be curious to see exactly what services they're using, particular to that service. So again, another diverse kind of story here, different AWS, and in this case, Snowflake services that I'm using. Now, the interesting thing about this is, take, for example, RDS. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone who has a $12.73 RDS bill per month. Why is that number so low? Well, the answer is because this is the power of our shared cost and proportional allocation. The cost of this RDS cluster is being allocated to this specific customer umbrella corp just based on their usage. So they're accounting for $12.73 of our actual usage. That's a pretty powerful figure to get at that I would otherwise have to take averages, maybe back of the envelope kind of math and try to figure out exactly what's happening. And it's possible that that might be spread out across multiple RDS infrastructure. So as I drill down, I can now see all the clusters and instances that are associated with that and start to get into some of the engineering data associated. But what if I want to see the actual total cost of these systems? Well, this is where CloudZero can just continue to drive into that system all the way. So now I'm looking at a detailed view of that particular service, that RDS instance running in my environment. And I can see the total cost for this system over the last 7 days was $176. So I'm no longer looking at this from an allocation to just a specific customer, but the total cost for this RDS instance. And I can see that's fairly constant over time. We're also pulling in all of the metadata associated with this: tags, properties, systems, resource relationships, even configuration changes if we observe them, that can help an engineer or a DevOps or CloudOps individual troubleshoot and understand the behavior of their environment without having to go looking elsewhere. So there's a lot of information that's coming together within CloudZero system, and one of the reasons why engineers absolutely love our platform. Now, there's a couple other things I want to show you before we wrap up. In addition to sending anomalies to engineering teams and operations personnel when we observe interesting insights, we're also observing cost optimization opportunities, things that we believe are biased towards action. One of the things that CloudZero prides themselves on is making sure that this list of things to do is focused on things that we think are actually effectively possible by your teams, because we want to help you save money, not waste time. So Insights collects a lot of information across your environment and makes a number of recommendations. And when we look at those recommendations, we can get down to the specific details, cost impact, resources involved, and I can even pick a particular status or effort level or add comments to track that activity over time. I can also create my own insights. I can go into the platform and choose to take observations that I've made. One thing we've noticed working with customers of all kind of scales and sizes, from spending tens of thousands of dollars a month to hundreds of millions of dollars a year, that most organizations have built tools or scripts or other capabilities, but that information is a lot of times getting lost. So we have an API that allows you to bring your own tools or systems, or even build additional integrations into Insights so that we can consolidate this information together. So I see another question in the Q&A here. I'm going to take a pause here to answer this one. The question is, what access level does CloudZero require to onboard cloud accounts? So specifically, CloudZero focuses on read-only and very limited permissions to the accounts that we connect to. When we're establishing that connection, we only want to read data, never write or change anything in the environment. And we want to limit that connection to just the metadata associated with the operation of your systems. No customer data is sent to us unless you choose to provide it to us in a telemetry stream. We never have access to PII or any sensitive data like that. And we remain very focused on solving the problem. What did it cost? Why did it cost that much? How are your teams going to wrap their arms around it and address those challenges? Those are the things that we focus our data collection on. So great question. Now, I've only shown you a slice of the platform. I've shown you a little bit about how to configure it, a little bit about the insights that we collect. We have a budgeting capability that also can track and forecast information across teams that you can define within the platform. And those teams can represent your business units or individual engineering groups that drive the changes that are occurring in your environment. But one thing that is very powerful in terms of what CloudZero has built is that data model, bringing all of that information together. And so the question is, how do we get that information into interesting and unique reports that can drive specific parts of your business as well? So we have a reporting capability that allow us to work together to build custom dashboards or reports that can get at specific questions that we're trying to answer. So for example, here's a custom cost per customer dashboard that helps us understand specifically what our top 10 most expensive customers are, what services they might be using, and quickly explore that data from a more business-centric view. I can also see the total cost per customer over the last 30 days and see which ones are accounting for the majority of my spend and see that trend over time. We have other forecasting and FinOps focused dashboards as well that we can also customize in terms of forecasting and predicting where your bill is going to end up, and also breaking that out in terms of cost by environment, production versus R&D or service usage. Again, any dimension or capability you can imagine. All of the data that's coming into our platform is available to you to build custom reports or drive other processes. In fact, you can build your own tools and technologies on top of our data model and incorporate that into other processes or activities that you have in your environment. Probably one of the most powerful examples of this is what one of our customers recently did to take the cost per customer data and build an integration directly with their implementation of Salesforce. Now, every customer that they sell to, their sales team understands what their gross margins are when they're thinking about negotiating contracts or optimizing that renewal. This is very important for software organizations, as you can imagine, to ensure that they're building profitable software. So that is just one way that we can get this data out of CloudZero's platform and put it in the hands of the business to make even more powerful decisions. Are you pricing your products correctly? Are you allocating your resources in ways that are going to drive profitability and growth? No matter what your engineering team has done, they may have built the most efficient architecture on the planet, if the product team hasn't priced it correctly, you're never going to be profitable. And so these teams have to work together. That's one of the tenets of FinOps. How do we connect different organizations together so that they can communicate against a common set of data to make better business and technical decisions? So I am going to jump over to the questions. I see there's a couple more kind of flowing in the Q&A. I would ask at this point if anyone has any additional questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And I'll take the first one here off the top. So the question is, can we comment on how our system can be used as a guide for agile processes, e.g. before your system is built? So there's a couple of things that CloudZero has built on this. One thing I'll show you is a tool that is free and available to anyone called Advisor. Advisor helps organizations start to think about some of the costs associated with the assets that they might be choosing before they start building. Specifically, I can look across a number of services, different types of resource types, explore the individual costs, see comparison details across other capabilities. And this is just the start of this. We're continuing to invest in this tool to ultimately drive data earlier into the software engineering process. We have big plans about what we can do deeper into the engineering lifecycle. Today, our focus has been on getting engineering teams rapid feedback as they make changes. And what we see engineering teams do in their R&D or experimentation environment is build very small prototypes of the technologies they're working on. And then as they deploy those and see them working in those test environments, they have access to see what they're costing in a way that's very relevant to the software engineering and development cycles. One thing that we've noticed and learned about cost over the years is that engineering costs are not just the infrastructure choices, but also how these systems interconnect and get used and are consumed. And so we're taking that holistic view to understand the total costs. Advisor, though, is just one of the tools that we're working on to try to answer this question. And it's always our objective. How do we get earlier and earlier in the life cycle so that we can save companies money by simply helping them avoid spending it in the first place? All right. The other question I see here is a question around budgets, how budgets work in CloudZero, how you can define budgets to specific workloads. So you can define what we call views around any particular team, project, feature. And once you've defined a view, I can define a budget around that. That budget can be based on different data that is specific to that project or team. And once we've loaded that into the system, editing it and uploading it into the system, we'll track that and then via Slack or email provide regular updates as the month progresses. If we start to detect that it's going to go over budget, we'll start to send alerts and start to identify the particular assets or specific components that are going above budget and provide additional guidance as the month continues. So there's a number of ways to configure that. We've got a lot of other ideas about how we apply anomaly detection and other capabilities to this over time. And this is an area where we're spending a lot of energy to improve as well and integrate into the entire system. And of course, this is built on that dimensions capability. If you are allocating Kubernetes spend, for example, and breaking out that spend by label or namespace, or you have different projects that are all using that shared asset, all of the allocation and rules that you build to break those things out can be, of course, used to do that show back or charge back or per business or per team allocated view and contribute to that graph that we're building of the spend. So excellent. I think I've given everyone hopefully a good view of the platform today. I hope everyone thoroughly enjoyed getting a sense of all of the types of things that CloudZero's platform can do. There's certainly a lot more that we can dive into, and I encourage everyone to reach out to CloudZero. Send us an email or reach out on cloudzero.com to let us know if you'd like to take a deeper, more tailored view of the product directly, either connected to your environments, where we can explore your costs and help you drive very quick and easy cost savings, or just take a deeper dive with one of our product experts. And like I said, I hope to stay in connection with all of you. So please reach out, Twitter or email eric@cloudzero.com, and let me know what you think. If you participate in the FinOps Foundation, please reach out in the FinOps Slack. I'm always available there, as well in our CloudZero Slack channel. And we look forward to having conversations with our customers and prospects. And in the future, we're happy to answer more questions as they occur. So anyways, I hope everyone has a wonderful new year. They turn over a new leaf. They think about those 3 New Year's resolutions. Let's get organized. Let's understand our shared costs and unit economics. And let's empower our engineers to make better buying decisions. Hope you all join me online, and again, at cloudzero.com. And I look forward to what comes next. And just as we end the conversation here, I see one question coming in here about suggesting savings to the customers. That was that insights capability I showed earlier. It is the particular area in our product where we can guide our customers to see what recommendations we or our team is making. And our customer success organization partners with all of our customers to build additional details as well. Last but not least, this presentation and recording will be shared with everyone here. So by all means, you'll be able to go back, replay some of the greatest hits in this, and let us know what you think. So I encourage you all, get your costs under control with CloudZero. Have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you all in the new year. Thank you.